The air in my small basement apartment always smells of steam, hot iron, and 45 years of other people's worn out lives. My name is Clara. I am 62 years old, and if you looked closely at my hands right now, you would see a map of skin carved by steel needles, pricked raw, calloused, and permanently stained with the ghost of dark blue denim and heavy wool. For decades, my world has been measured in hems taken in, buttons tightened, and tears mended for strangers who walk in and out of the laundry shop on the outskirts of Chicago. I didn't mind the labor. Every stitch I pulled, every hour I hunched over my sewing machine under the buzzing fluorescent light had a purpose. It had a name: Julian. My son, Julian, 34 years old now, a graduate of Northwestern University and currently a senior marketing director at a major financial firm. He lives in a world of glass, polished marble, and manicured lawns in Naperville, miles away from the damp concrete floors of my neighborhood. He is a man who builds campaigns, manages budgets, and speaks the crisp, smooth language of corporate success. And today is Thanksgiving. In the quiet stillness of my small kitchen, sitting on a wobbly folding chair, I'm carefully ironing the only expensive piece of clothing I own, a heavy wool coat in deep forest green. It was a gift from Julian, bought 3 years ago during his first corporate Christmas bonus. It's a little frayed at the cuffs now, but I pressed it twice, making sure there wasn't a single wrinkle, because I refuse to give anyone a reason to look down on my boy. Not that it would matter. Some people have already decided what they are going to see before you even open your mouth. My chest tightens with a familiar dull ache, but I push it down. It's Thanksgiving. Families get anxious, but blood is thicker than pride. I tell myself that once he sees me, everything will be fine. I pack the tin box and the embroidered handkerchief carefully into a canvas tote bag. I zip up my forest green coat, pull a knitted scarf around my neck, and lock the apartment door behind me. Outside, the Chicago wind bites straight through my wool, sharp and merciless. I walk 4 blocks down the cracked pavement to the bus stop, my boots clicking against the gray concrete. The journey to Naperville takes 2 hours and 3 separate buses. As the city buildings slowly give way to wide highways and grand, secluded neighborhoods lined with massive brick houses and towering oak trees, the world outside the bus window changes entirely. It's a quiet, wealthy world where houses don't just sit on plots of land, they guard them. When the bus lets me out near the address Julian sent me, I walk another half-mile down a long, winding gravel path. My legs ache, and the canvas bag grows heavier with every step. The air smells of dead leaves and distant chimney smoke, but as I draw closer to Julian's house, a different scent drifts on the breeze: expensive potpourri, roasted sage, and the metallic chill of a life I do not belong to. I stop at the edge of their manicured driveway and look up at the double doors of the house. The windows are blazing with golden light. I'm holding a bag containing homemade cookies and a hand-stitched handkerchief. Inside those walls are people who measure human worth by stock portfolios and designer labels. And waiting for me at the top of that gravel path is my son, a boy I gave my youth to, standing on the other side of a door that I no longer have the key to open. I take a deep breath, smooth down the frayed cuffs of my coat, and take my first step onto their stone porch. The gravel crunched beneath my worn boots as I walked up the sweeping driveway. Ahead of me, Julian's house stood like a fortress of modern wealth, all towering glass windows, warm yellow lights, and dark cedar wood, glowing brightly against the freezing November dusk. From the wide open windows, the rich, buttery scent of roasted turkey drifted out. But as I stepped closer to the double front doors, it was instantly overpowered by a heavy wall of expensive French perfume and sweet indoor potpourri. The heavy oak door swung open before I could even raise my hand to knock. It was Julian, my son. For a split second, looking at him standing there in his crisp designer sweater, I hoped for a normal son's welcome, a warm hand on my shoulder, an embrace, anything to chase away the chill of that 2-hour bus ride. But there was no embrace. His eyes darted quickly past my shoulder toward the empty street behind me, checking if anyone was watching. His gaze dropped immediately to my feet, lingering for a fraction of a second on the dried mud caked around the soles of my boots before flicking back up to my face with a flash of panicked embarrassment. "Mom, you're here," Julian murmured, his voice tight. Without waiting for me to step fully across the threshold, he reached out and gently plucked the canvas tote bag right out of my hands, clutching it close to his chest as if it were contraband. Come in, let's get you out of the cold." I stepped inside and the warmth of the foyer wrapped around me, but it felt suffocating. The house was immaculate, a sterile showroom of white linen couches, polished glass coffee tables, and abstract art that I didn't know how to look at. It was a million miles away from the damp warmth of my basement apartment and the steady, comforting hum of my sewing machine. Before I could even reach for the zipper of my forest green coat, a sharp, nasal voice cut through the air from the living room, slicing straight through the classical background music. "Oh, Julian," a voice drawled, dripping with lazy condescension. "Finally! I was beginning to think your guest from the laundry district had gotten lost between the bus stop and civilization." I looked into the brightly lit living room. Perched on the center of the white couch like a queen upon a throne sat Mrs. Eleanor, Victoria's mother. She was a tall, gaunt woman with hawkish, sharp features, her fingers heavy with sparkling diamond rings that caught the chandelier light. She didn't bother to stand up. She didn't even lower her crystal champagne flute. She simply sat there, swirling her drink, looking at me the way an inspector looks at a stain on a new brand carpet. I forced a tight, polite smile, pressing my hands together inside my coat pockets. "Good evening, Eleanor. Happy Thanksgiving." Eleanor didn't reply to the greeting. She just offered a thin, venomous smirk, turning her head toward my son. "Well, Julian insisted on family obligations," Eleanor said, aloud, her voice carrying across the entire open concept floor plan. "We were perfectly content having our intimate gathering, but he felt he simply had to drag, well, you into it." Before I could find a breath to steady my chest, Victoria appeared from the direction of the kitchen. My daughter-in-law looked like she had just stepped off the glossy cover of a high-end fashion magazine. Flawless blonde hair, perfectly manicured hands, and a silk designer dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. She walked over to where Julian was awkwardly holding my canvas tote bag. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly as she peered inside, pulling out the round tin of butter cookies I had spent 2 full days baking and the delicate linen handkerchief edged with green velvet. Victoria lifted the lid of the tin, sniffed the cookies with a delicate wrinkle of her nose, and let out a cold, dry chuckle. "Mom, look at this. Homemade sweets from an unknown kitchen. Honestly, who knows what kind of sanitary conditions or cheap ingredients went into these? We certainly can't serve this to our guests. We'd risk food poisoning before dinner even started." Without a second thought, without a single look of hesitation or respect for the hours I had spent standing over my kitchen counter, Victoria turned around and dropped the entire tin box and the embroidered handkerchief straight into the sleek steel garbage can sitting right beside the front door.
The lid swung shut with a sharp, heavy metallic clang. The sound echoed loudly in the quiet foyer. My chest went completely hollow. Every word, every movement, every carefully planned gesture of goodwill I had brought with me was sitting at the bottom of a trash can, discarded like unwanted waste. I looked at Julian, my son, the boy I had raised alone, the man I had spent 45 years breaking my hands to put through university. I looked into his eyes, waiting for him to step forward, waiting for him to say just a single word to defend the gift his mother had made with her own hands. Julian stared down at his shiny leather shoes. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He swallowed hard, completely paralyzed by his own cowardice, choosing the safety of his silence over his own mother. I didn't scream. I didn't let the hot tears burning behind my eyelids spill over. I simply swallowed the bitter taste of humiliation, reached up with fingers that felt heavy and numb, unbuttoned my frayed forest green coat, and hung it quietly on the wall hook.
Julian motioned toward the archway, his voice clipped and transactional, instructing us into the dining room as if leading an uncomfortable client through corporate headquarters. We walked down the short corridor into a room dominated by an immense polished mahogany table. It stretched across the space beneath a sparkling crystal chandelier, draped in heavy white linen and laid with silver cutlery that caught the light like cold, sharp blades. It was a dining room built entirely for display, designed to project an image of absolute perfection to anyone fortunate enough to cross its threshold. The seating chart had been engineered with surgical, ruthless precision. Victoria and her mother, Eleanor, occupied the absolute center, flanked by empty chairs left vacant for theatrical symmetry and balance. Julian sat immediately beside his wife, positioning himself precisely where his new life, his social standing, and his corporate ambitions required him to be. And me? I was guided to the furthest, darkest corner of the room, squeezed onto a small, stiff auxiliary chair right beside the swinging kitchen door. It was the exact spot reserved for hired help, coat racks, or unwanted strangers, placed safely out of sight from the center of power and wealth. Before my hand could even brush the edge of the table, a small burst of movement broke through the heavy, suffocating silence of the room. It was Leo, my 9-year-old grandson. His face lit up with an unfiltered, desperate kind of joy the moment he spotted me, and he scrambled away from his seat, sprinting down the long length of the mahogany table to throw his small arms tightly around my neck. "Grandma, I missed you so much," he whispered fiercely against my shoulder. My chest surged with a sudden aching wave of warmth, a brief reminder of unconditional love in a room frozen by status. But that fragile comfort vanished the microsecond Eleanor slammed her wineglass down onto the wood, her voice slicing through the air with venomous authority. "Leonardo, sit up straight right now and do not touch her. Do not associate with things carrying the germs of poverty. You are stepping into a private elite academy next semester, and you need to learn standards, not street habits." Leo flinched backward as if physically struck, his lower lip trembling as Victoria smoothly stepped in with a cold, controlled reprimand to pull her son back into line. The boy dragged his feet toward his designated seat, casting one helpless, sorrowful glance in my direction before keeping his head locked downward. The meal unfolded as a slow, agonizing exercise in endurance. Silver forks clinked against fine china, while Eleanor held absolute court from the center of the table. Course after course of rich, elaborate dishes appeared and disappeared, accompanied by an endless, unceasing monologue of superiority. She spoke of exclusive country club memberships, private yacht charters along the Mediterranean, and elite social circles before smoothly pivoting into loud, pointed tirades directed at the lower classes.
She held nothing back, broadcasting her deep contempt for anyone who relied on public assistance or lived outside her gilded perimeter, framing poverty not as a circumstance but as a personal moral failure that polluted society. Her words were calculated to sting, to float across the linen tablecloth like invisible smoke meant to suffocate anyone who didn't belong in their world, reminding everyone in that room of the invisible barrier separating the elite from the forgotten. I kept my gaze entirely fixed on my plate, methodically pushing a single roasted potato back and forth with my fork, refusing to let them see any crack in my armor. Instead of looking at Eleanor, my eyes drifted across the long stretch of the mahogany table toward my son. Julian was sitting just feet away. He had his silver knife gripped tightly in his fist, meticulously carving his turkey breast into smaller and smaller, microscopic slivers. His eyes were locked downward onto his plate with an intensity that bordered on panic. He did not blink, he did not look up, he did not offer a single syllable, a single glance, or a single microscopic defense to shield his mother from the humiliation being poured over her head. In that dead, suffocating quiet, the final illusion shattered completely. Julian wasn't just sitting in silence because he was caught in the middle. His silence was an active choice. He had weighed 45 years of sacrifice against his corporate title and his expensive marriage, and he had decided that his mother's dignity was a cheap price to pay for a permanent seat at their table.
The air around the grand mahogany table felt heavy, thick with the uncomfortably polite laughter and the quiet metallic clinking of expensive silverware against crystal plates. But beneath the surface veneer of high society celebration, the tension was stretching thin, taut like a wire pulled to its absolute breaking point, ready to snap at the slightest touch. A quiet, distressed fussing broke out at the far end of the table, cutting through the murmurs of wealth and privilege. It was little Leo. The heavy, stiff collar of his designer dress shirt was visibly digging into his young neck, pulling much too tight against his skin under the weight of formal expectations. The boy was suffocating under the rigid rules of the holiday, struggling to draw a proper breath, and hot tears of frustration began welling up in his wide, frightened eyes. He caught my eye across the long expanse of the room, lifting a small, trembling hand to tug frantically at the choking top button, looking across the room to me for any kind of comfort, rescue, or relief from his misery. I didn't hesitate for a single second. The instinct of a mother and a grandmother outweighed every cautious warning whispering in my mind. I pushed my stiff chair back from my dark, isolated corner of the room and stood up, walking softly across the thick white linen carpet toward my grandson to help loosen the tight, suffocating button for him. The moment my shoes stepped away from my designated corner, Eleanor slammed her crystal wine glass down onto the polished wood with a sharp, echoing crack that startled the guests nearby. The casual conversations across the table instantly died away into a breathless hush. She leaned back against her velvet chair, her lips curling into a vicious, mocking sneer that targeted every single worn-out, calloused inch of my entire life. Already up from your seat? Well, since you're already on your feet, why don't you head down to the kitchen, grab a rag, and wipe up that spilled red wine the maid left on the floor? William, oh, forgive me, Clara, but once a domestic worker is always a domestic worker, right? You should at least know how to clean. The entire room held its collective breath, waiting in morbid suspense to see how the poor old woman from the laundry shop would take the public humiliation, expecting me to shrink back into the shadows with my head bowed in permanent submission. I stopped moving. My fingers froze just inches away from Leo's tight collar. Slowly, I straightened my back, turned around, and locked my eyes directly at Eleanor's smug, venomous face.
I didn't shout. My voice was completely steady, quiet, yet carved from 45 years of surviving a harsh world that tried its best to crush me into dust. I am a guest invited by my son to Thanksgiving, madam. I am not a servant in this house. The words hit the air like falling glass, shattering whatever fragile pretense of holiday civility was left in the room. For a fraction of a second, absolute dead silence swallowed the space whole. Then Eleanor's face contorted with pure, incandescent rage. The idea that someone she deemed far beneath her contempt, a poor, aging woman with ruined hands, dared to talk back to her in front of her elite high society peers was more than her fragile, bloated ego could ever endure. She stood up so violently her heavy chair screeched harshly against the hardwood floor. Before anyone could blink or intervene, she rounded the table, lunged forward with a twisted snarl, and struck me across the face with a vicious, open-handed slap. The sharp crack of the impact echoed violently through the silent, cavernous dining room like a gunshot. The brutal shock of the impact spun my head sharply to the side, and a hot, metallic taste bloomed instantly inside my mouth as my teeth grazed my inner cheek. Warm blood trickled quietly from the corner of my lip, a bright crimson line against my aging skin. I lifted a trembling, slow hand to my burning cheek, staring blankly down at the pristine floor for a heavy heartbeat before slowly raising my eyes. I looked directly across the room at my own flesh and blood, searching his face for any trace of the boy I once knew. Julian, the boy I had raised alone in a freezing, damp basement, the man I had broken my body, my health, and my spirit for, so he could sit at tables like this one without ever knowing hunger. He was gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard his knuckles had turned completely, ghostly white. His entire body was trembling in pure, unadulterated panic. I waited for him to move. I waited for him to stand up, to shove his chair backward, to shield his mother from the cruel predator who had just physically struck her inside his own home. He didn't move an inch. Not a single muscle twitched to defend me. Instead, his eyes darted nervously between his mother-in-law and the horrified glances of the wealthy guests before finally locking on me with pure, gut-wrenching cowardice that chilled me to the bone. "Julian," whispered Julian, his voice shaking with desperate, pathetic fear. "Just apologize to Grandma. Stop provoking her. Why do you always have to cause a scene? Just bow your head and say you're sorry, and everything will be fine." The final thread holding my heart together snapped inside my chest. Not the physical blow from Eleanor's hand. That was just surface pain, easily endured by a lifetime of scars. But the poison spilling from my own son's mouth cut deeper than any steel needle ever could, slicing straight into my soul, burning every single memory of sacrifice into cold, empty ash, and leaving nothing behind of the mother he used to love.
The heavy silence inside that opulent dining room felt like lead. It was a suffocating stillness, broken only by the harsh, uneven breathing of a mother standing alone in a corner she was banished to. Eleanor stood tall and rigid at the center of the table, her hands planted firmly on her hips, her chin lifted in arrogant triumph as she waited for me to break, to bow my head, and to submit completely to her cruel dominance. Victoria sat right beside her, her lips curled into an ugly, triumphant smirk, watching the humiliation play out with quiet satisfaction. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully crushed the last remaining piece of my dignity into the dirt. They had no idea what was quietly unfolding just inches away from them, hidden in the shadows of the large mahogany table. A sudden light rustle of movement broke the heavy air behind my skirt. I looked down and my chest tightened instantly. It was Leo. My 9-year-old grandson had slipped away from his seat while the adults were entirely consumed by their own cruelty. His small face was stained with fresh tears, his eyes red and swollen, but in his tiny hands he held something that instantly changed the entire physics of the room. It was his smartphone. The screen was brightly lit, casting a sharp, cold blue glow across his terrified, determined face. At the top of the display, a glowing red indicator blinked steadily, broadcasting every single word, every gasping breath, and every ugly act live to the world, streaming directly onto a public social media account and saving an immutable copy straight to the family cloud storage system, accessible by hundreds of contacts. Before anyone at the table could even comprehend the imaginable danger approaching them, the boy stepped out from behind my skirt, squaring his small shoulders. He looked directly past me, staring straight into the pale, frozen faces of his mother and his grandmother, and asked a question so pure, so devastatingly innocent, yet as sharp and precise as a razor blade cutting through silk. "Mom, my teacher told me hitting people is against the law, right? Grandma Eleanor just hit Grandma Clara. Why is Daddy making Grandma Clara apologize? I recorded the whole thing on video. I already sent it to all of Daddy's coworkers and posted it online for everyone to see." The words dropped into the room like a heavy bomb detonating in a quiet space. For one frozen heartbeat, time itself seemed to stop dead in its tracks, freezing every single person in their respective places, paralyzed by the sheer shock of exposure. Then, the color drained completely from Eleanor, leaving her looking like a corpse carved from cold stone. All the arrogant authority, all the venomous power she held just a second ago evaporated into thin air. Panic seized her entirely, transforming her into a cornered animal desperate for survival. With a frantic, wild shriek, she lunged away from her chair, abandoning all pretense of high society grace, and rushed forward like a madwoman, claws outstretched, desperate to grab the phone out of the boy's hands and destroy the digital evidence forever. "Give me that phone, you little brat!" Eleanor screeched, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated terror. But Leo was quicker than she expected. Startled by her sudden, violent lunge, the boy darted backwards instinctively, spinning around and hiding securely behind my legs once again, holding the glowing device safely out of her reach. Eleanor crashed forward, stumbling against the edge of the mahogany table, completely humiliated as she clawed blindly at empty air in front of horrified guests. At that exact moment, the horrifying realization of what had just happened slammed into Victoria like a physical blow. Her eyes widened in sheer, unmitigated terror as she grabbed her own phone off the table, her trembling fingers frantically tapping at the live stream dashboard and notification logs. The viewer list was updating in real time, flooding with names that made her blood run instantly cold. Among the hundreds of high society acquaintances, club members, and distant relatives watching the broadcast live were the executive names that dictated their entire corporate existence. The chief executive officer of the massive conglomerate where both Victoria and Julian held their prestigious, high-paying executive positions was actively logged into the stream, watching the entire public spectacle unfold frame by frame, detail by detail. Victoria's breath caught sharply in her throat, her chest heaving as wave after wave of nauseating dread washed over her. The foundation of their carefully constructed lies, the elite status they had built on the backs of cruelty and exclusion, was crumbling into dust right before their eyes.
All the wealth, all the designer labels, and all the arrogant superiority could not save them from what was coming. Every privilege they wore like armor was instantly stripped away by a 9-year-old's smartphone. Victoria let out a shrill, piercing scream of absolute horror that echoed off the crystal chandelier, collapsing back into her velvet chair as she realized their glittering, fake world had just been burned to the ground. The digital world moves faster than any human breath, and cruelty captured on a glowing screen spreads like wildfire through dry brush. By the time the cold autumn sun dipped below the horizon on that Thanksgiving evening, the video Leo recorded had already escaped the confines of our small family tragedy and entered the unforgiving, restless public arena of the internet, where millions of strangers waited to pass judgment on us all. Within less than 12 hours, the raw footage of an elite, wealthy matriarch striking an impoverished elderly woman across the face with a grown son standing by in pathetic, shivering silence became a massive viral phenomenon. It exploded across every major social media platform, tearing through news feeds, neighborhood groups, and viral aggregators with terrifying velocity. By the following morning, the view count had shattered past 1.5 million, accompanied by endless waves of unbridled public outrage, fiery condemnation, and digital pitchforks pointed squarely at the gilded gates of Julian's suburban estate. I did not return directly to my quiet apartment after walking out of that nightmare. My steps took me elsewhere, driven by a cold, steady clarity I hadn't felt in decades of quiet endurance and silent suffering. Leaving the upscale neighborhood behind, I walked straight into the local police precinct in Naperville. Sitting across from a tired, professional desk sergeant under the flickering fluorescent lights, I laid the digital proof right onto the counter, the full, unedited video clip capturing every single second of the unprovoked attack. I formally pressed charges, initiating official legal proceedings for assault and battery against Eleanor. The law does not care how expensive your pearls are, nor does it protect you just because your zip code carries social prestige and wealth. True justice does not bow to high society. And then the real storm hit. The consequences descended on the architects of my humiliation with the brutal, unstoppable force of an avalanche crashing down a mountain peak, leaving nothing standing in its wake. The digital backlash didn't just linger in online comment sections, it struck straight at the foundation of their carefully guarded status. By noon the following day, the high-profile charitable foundations and philanthropic boards Eleanor had lorded over for decades issued emergency statements, cutting all ties and stripping her of her honorary titles instantly due to her public acts of violence and open, venomous contempt for the less fortunate. Her name, once whispered with reverence in elite country club circles, overnight became synonymous with toxic arrogance, cruelty, and public disgrace. Victoria fared no better in the corporate fallout. The financial conglomerate where she held a senior executive position received thousands of tags, emails, and direct complaints from outraged clients and the public. Citing a severe, irreversible breach of corporate ethics and conduct guidelines, the board of directors terminated her employment on the spot, erasing her high-flying career in a single afternoon without a second glance. As for Julian, his pristine corporate life imploded from every conceivable direction, stripped of his director title and indefinitely suspended from his firm as the public relations nightmare spiraled completely out of control. His entire identity collapsed. The elite illusion he had traded his mother's dignity for had vanished into thin air. And the woman he had sacrificed everything to please, Victoria didn't waste a single breath offering comfort or loyalty. Fearing for her own remaining assets and desperate to distance herself instantly from a sinking ship, she threw divorce papers on their kitchen counter before the sun had even set, demanding immediate legal separation to protect what remained of her personal wealth. My phone began buzzing relentlessly by late afternoon. It didn't stop vibrating against the polished wooden surface of the kitchen table, echoing the chaos of their collapsing world. Call after call, text after text, notification after notification flooded my screen without a moment's rest. Julian's number flashed across the display hundreds of times, interspersed with desperate, frantic messages, begging me to drop the police charges, pleading for mercy, and demanding that I step forward on social media to clear his name and salvage what was left of his ruined corporate career. I did not answer a single call. I did not read a single word of his pathetic, self-serving apologies. With a calm, deliberate motion of my thumb, I blocked his number entirely, severing the last fragile thread tethering my heart to a son who had chosen his master over his mother. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was the quiet peace of a boundary finally drawn and a life finally reclaimed after years of being silenced in the dark. And as I sat there in the quiet room, watching the notification lights fade away one by one, I knew the bitter chapter was finally closed forever. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clean slate, an unbroken spirit, and a heart that finally belonged to itself alone.
Months have passed since the legal storm finally settled, leaving behind a quiet world where the air feels light and clean to breathe again. The administrative court rulings, the mandated legal penalties, and the public orders forcing Eleanor to issue formal apologies and financial compensation for emotional damages are now just ink drying on old paper. My life has returned to its familiar, steady rhythm inside the small, warm corners of my old laundry shop, far away from the gilded cages and poisoned glass of high society. The steam from the pressing machines rises in gentle, rhythmic wisps, fogging the front glass windows against the chill of a changing season. Sitting comfortably beside my worn wooden sewing table, I pull a familiar garment close to my chest. It is my old, frayed coat. The collar is worn thin by time, and the cuffs bear the faint, stubborn marks of decades of honest, back-breaking labor. But as I run my weathered fingers along the fabric, I no longer feel the stinging shadows of humiliation or the bitter bite of inadequacy that once choked me in that opulent suburban dining room. That coat is no longer a symbol of poverty to be hidden away in shame. It is a medal of honor, a badge of absolute, unyielding pride. I wore it straight through the worst of their devastating storm, and I walked out of the wreckage with my spine straight and my head held high, having steadfastly refused to sell my dignity or my soul for a seat at their toxic, heartless table. A sharp, crisp chime from the front door breaks the steady hum of the machines. The mail carrier has left a heavy package resting on the counter. It isn't a bill, nor is it a legal notice or another hollow threat. It is a plain, brown paper parcel addressed in a child's careful, slightly trembling handwriting. My fingers shake slightly as I open the package under the warm glow of the desk lamp. Inside lies a handwritten letter and a folded piece of white drawing paper. It is from Leo, my brave, brilliant grandson. Ever since that fateful Thanksgiving night, Julian and Victoria,
terrified by public exposure, desperate to salvage their social status, and punishing the boy for breaking their code of silence, placed Leo under the harshest disciplinary lockdown of their lives, completely banning him from using any smart devices, computers, or phones for an entire year, for daring to betray the family name. I unfold the drawing with infinite care. The colored pencil strokes are clumsy, yet fiercely sincere. It depicts two figures sitting happily side by side on a wooden park bench, sharing oversized ice cream cones under a bright, cheerful yellow sun. Beside the drawing, written in uneven, earnest letters, are the words that make my chest ache with a profound, overwhelming wave of emotion. I love you, Grandma. I would rather take the punishment than ever let anyone bully you. A warm tear slips quietly down my cheek, but for the first time in my life, it is not a tear of sorrow or defeat. It is a tear of pure, unadulterated relief. I close my eyes, letting the quiet peace wash over me like a gentle summer rain after a long drought. Life is like a garment that has been torn and mended 1,000 times over the years. My own hands have stitched together countless broken seams, knowing all too well that some tears in the fabric of a family can never truly be mended back to the way they were, just like the shattered, arrogant life of my own son Julian, who chose his cage of gold and lost his soul entirely. Some relationships are beyond repair, some rifts are permanent. But as I look down at the little boy's drawing resting gently on my lap, a profound sense of gratitude fills my soul. Thank God that somewhere deep within this broken bloodline, a single green shoot of pure integrity managed to survive. A child who still knows right from wrong, who still recognizes truth when he sees it, and who chooses unconditional love over cold cruelty. For an old woman who spent her entire life stitching together other people's discarded clothes, that simple, uncorrupted sprout of goodness is more than enough. It is enough to heal every hidden scar. It is enough to make an entire lifetime worth living.
Before we say goodbye, I want to talk to you for just a moment. Wherever you are right now, what city are you sitting in? And what time is it on your clock as you watch this? Let me know in the comments below so I can see just how far this story traveled to reach you. More importantly, looking at this story, what is the biggest lesson you are taking away today? Is it about the strength to stand back up when everything is stripped away, the courage to walk away from toxic bonds, or the realization that human dignity and self-respect can never be bought with a price tag? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I would love to know how this resonated with you. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next story. Thank you so much for watching. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video. Before we say goodbye, I want to talk to you for just a moment. Wherever you are right now, what city are you sitting in, and what time is it on your clock as you watch this? Let me know in the comments below so I can see just how far this story traveled to reach you. More importantly, looking at this story, what is the biggest lesson you are taking away today? Is it about the strength to stand back up when everything is stripped away, the courage to walk away from toxic bonds, or the realization that human dignity and self-respect can never be bought with a price tag? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I would love to know how this resonated with you. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next story. Thank you so much for watching. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video. Before we say goodbye, I want to talk to you for just a moment. Wherever you are right now, what city are you sitting in, and what time is it on your clock as you watch this? Let me know in the comments below so I can see just how far this story traveled to reach you. More importantly, looking at this story, what is the biggest lesson you are taking away today? Is it about the strength to stand back up when everything is stripped away, the courage to walk away from toxic bonds, or the realization that human dignity and self-respect can never be bought with a price tag? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I would love to know how this resonated with you. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next story. Thank you so much for watching. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.